And can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, so what we're going to do is that we're going to talk primarily about the legal and ethical considerations of the COVID vaccine and see how much we know about it. Okay, a quick disclaimer at the very beginning. This is not medical advice. It isn't diagnostic or it isn't prescriptive. I'm only doing it so that we can all understand, especially the terminology, because unless you know the terminology, you get lost. And the last thing is that I have no conflict of interest. I'm not involved in any pharmaceutical company. So what I'm going to give you is the purest possible medical information that I possibly can. Okay. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to divide my presentation to you tonight into three parts. One is where we are at the moment, that is to say the current situation. I have pre-selected a number of frequently asked questions that people ask of me and that I can actually see in social media. And then the time that we're going to be spending most of our energies on is going to be on the ethical considerations of the vaccination and the vaccination program. Well, first thing I want to show you is that as of February the 3rd, and this is the latest information that I have, if you take a look at the very top, the nation that as of February the 3rd had 38% of its population vaccinated was Israel. And if you get down 4, the United States is with 8.12%. Now, I just want to make sure that, we understand that, of course, the population, and I looked that up yesterday, population of the United States, the census as of 2020 census was 331 million people. So if you take 8.12% of the population vaccinated, it means that the United States, as of that date, had 26.9 million vaccinated. Israel has a population of 8.66 million. So with a percentage vaccination of 38.11, it gives you 3.3 million Israelis that have been vaccinated. But nevertheless, it is an astounding statistic that Israel leads the world in vaccination. Okay, so a few frequently asked questions. First one is, how can it be that these vaccines were developed so quickly? The other one is, who gets vaccinated, when and how? How is the United States, and I'm going to be dealing primarily with what we're doing in the United States, how did the United States allocate its very scarce vaccines on a state-by-state basis? How did that happen? And we're going to be talking about something called an algorithm. So I'm going to tell you about what an algorithm is in a minute. Should we, as a matter of fact, demand compulsory vaccination of certain critical workers? Can we force people to take the vaccine whether they want to or not? Okay, and the other question, the other frequently asked question is, do I really need the second shot? Okay, so let's take a look at those. The first one is, how did we develop this vaccine so quickly? Well, the fact of the matter is that the technology, if you go into the social media, they're going to be calling it a platform. So the technology and the platform is the same thing. The messenger RNA vaccines actually have been under development and used for about 20 years. So what we did is that we specifically targeted this mRNA to a certain portion of the COVID vaccine, but the technology, the platform, we have had for about 20 years. And we actually have used it on a number of the coronaviruses, because the coronaviruses is a family of viruses. And I'm showing you 2 of them in here. One, back in 2003, we actually used mRNA to treat SARS virus. SARS stands for severe acute respiratory syndrome. And if you may remember, the Ebola virus. So all of these were mRNA type vaccines. So the reason why things ran so quickly is that they were targeted for the COVID vaccine, but the platform had been around for quite a while. Now, the other question is, how was this allocated? And I'm sure that you know that at the very, very beginning, is that the government decided to do a phase 1, phase 2. In the phase 1, it was going to be medical personnel that was actually treating COVID patients. We were going to try to vaccinate first responders so that they would be protected if they were transporting COVID patients. And of course, individuals in nursing homes, because a very large percentage of the original number of deaths that we had in the United States happened in the nursing homes. Now, once those were done, then we were going to move into phase 2, and these will be individuals over the age of 85 with comorbidities. Now, once those were vaccinated, then you get down to 80, and then 75, and then 70, and so forth and so on with comorbidities. And the reason is that we needed millions and millions of doses, and they had to be essentially not only manufactured, but especially transported to the place where these things were going to be actually injected into people's shoulders. And then the other question was, what definition do we use for essential workers? Who are essential workers? Okay, the supply chain. This was a major problem because the states would send to the federal government, and the federal government already had this information, is that the states would receive the number of vaccines based on their specific population. And then within the states, the idea is that we would allocate as many vaccines going to the larger cities, because this is where the population was closer. And you remember that this type of vaccine is transmitted from person to person through speaking or coughing, or for that matter, singing or anything of that type. The other problem that we have with the supply chain is that the 2 mRNA vaccines required very low temperatures. We're talking about 70 to 72 Fahrenheit below zero. That is to say, they had to be maintained in dry ice. Now that we have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, this one is one in which it could actually be stored in a refrigerator. Then the other problem that we all faced on the supply chain is, what are the facilities that we have for vaccinating people? And even if you have the facilities for vaccinating people, do you have enough trained personnel that is going to be able to administer the vaccines and be available and ready in case that somebody actually had a bad reaction within 15 minutes after having been given the vaccine? So that's the supply chain side. So the question now is, do we have mandates? Because I'm going to show you, and we're going to come to that slide in a minute, but these are previews of coming attractions. In the United States, as well as many other countries, 24% of the population says that they will not get the vaccine. Period. They don't want it. So healthcare workers, individuals who are seeing patients, individuals who are treating patients, of 24% of those say that they're not going to get the vaccine. So imagine, for example, that you have a bellyache, or you fell down and you have to go and see a nurse, or you have to go and see a doctor. If the nurse has got the COVID disease, can you imagine if either a nurse or a doctor gives you the COVID? Now, shouldn't they be mandated to be vaccinated? The other question is, because of the fact that we have to do this thing very quickly, we didn't have the time to do a normal type of FDA approval. So if you had years in order to be able to develop the vaccine and getting the government permission to start injecting people, we would have done pregnant women, we would have done women with that are breastfeeding. It's a big question about that. What are we going to do with this type of population, even though they may not have pre-existing conditions? Should we mandate hospital chaplains to be vaccinated? What if they say no? Okay, now the other thing is, of that 24%, many of those are going to be in disability. Well, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. Do we bypass the Americans with Disabilities Act and say, you have to be vaccinated? That's an ethical question. Okay, the other one is, another ethical question, is for those individuals who are reluctant to get the vaccine, should we provide some kind of monetary incentive or some other type of incentive? Well, one last time, as you can see, Israel is up in the tippy top in there. And as a little joke that we have in the medical field, Israel is known as vaccination because of the fact that they're number one on vaccines. Okay, well, if we have compulsory vaccination of critical workers, we have throughout the world, and certainly in the United States, you as a patient have autonomy. You as a patient can say, I want that treatment or I don't want it. And by the way, this came as a result of what the Nazis did to us, that they were doing medical experiments without people's permission. Well, now this is a law throughout the world. So if you're a critical worker, don't you have autonomy? How about if you say, I don't want to get the vaccine for whatever your reasons are? Well, the other one is that we need to be able to make sure that as a priority, that we get public health. Well, 24% of the people who don't get the vaccine can infect millions of other ones, theoretically. Okay, the other one, of course, is that if you have 2 shots, with the new vaccines that was just approved this week, it's only 1 shot. But in the other one, remember, you had to come in either 28 days or 20 days, 29 days after your first shot. Well, there's a patient compliance problem because many people did not come back for the second shot. Okay, so do you really need a second shot? Well, the fact of the matter is that the clinical trials used 2 shots. So we need to follow the protocol that we had in the clinical trials. And the reason why this was done is that the pharmaceutical companies had to make a decision. The decision is, do we give you a single shot with a larger amount, or do we spread it into 2 shots, distance about 28 to 29 days later, so that you get used to the first one and then you get a booster shot. So the first one is called a priming shot, and then the second one is a booster shot. And the booster shot, well, essentially what it does is that the first one gives you protection, the beginning of protection. The second one gives you maximum efficacy against the virus. And of course, as of this week, Johnson & Johnson is starting to ship their vaccines, which, by the way, happen to be single shot because the platform is different. It is not mRNA. And now we're going to come to religious issues. Well, let's take a look at what the Christian community is saying. The Christian community says as follows: if at any point in time during the development or the testing of this vaccine, if at any point during this time or the manufacture, you used embryonic cells, we say, don't take it. So here's another one. If at any point during the development or the manufacture or the use or whatever it is, if you're using aborted human fetus cells in order to do whatever it is that you're going to do, we Christians say, don't use it. The other one is, what about the Jewish side? Well, here is the head of the Israel's Knesset. So this is a member of the Knesset, MK. He was speaking on behalf of the Haredi community in Israel. And essentially he said, we agree with the idea that the Haredi need to be vaccinated. However, we're going to say that you cannot be vaccinated on Shabbat. So we're going to prevent that from happening. Okay. So now let's go into the more issues regarding ethics. And whenever we talk about ethics, we need to talk about justice and fairness. So what's the difference between justice and fairness? Well, injustice is, well, do you vaccinate people who are 75 first or people who are 65 first? Do we specify that we're going to focus on nursing homes? What about individuals with comorbidities who may be in their 30s or 40s or 50s? That's justice. Fairness is, are you treating me the same as everybody else? Am I in the totem pole for getting vaccination equally to everybody else, whether you're rich or poor or whatever your skin color happens to be? Okay, so you remember that I said that we have to follow algorithms? Well, let me explain in a very simple way as to what an algorithm is, because if you go into the news, you're going to hear it all the time. Well, an algorithm is a series of sequential steps getting to a certain goal. And since we all make coffee and we have brewed coffee, well, if you brew coffee, essentially you're following an algorithm. So you have to take the coffee grounds, you have to put it someplace in a mug, you have to pour boiling water. Do you decide to use cream or sugar or none? And then after that, you can then, well, that is an algorithm. Okay, so now let's take and do a algorithm as far as the vaccine is concerned. Well, the algorithm is shown here. First, the state government decides how many of the vaccines are going to, shots are going to be sent to the state government. Then once it goes into the state government, the states decide, together with the local authorities, where and how is this thing going to go. Now, is this going to be at hospitals? Is it going to be in nursing care homes? Are they going to be in supermarkets? Where is it going to go? So that is a supply chain algorithm. And to give you a little bit more information as to why there is a tremendous discrepancy in how the different states have done it, is that if you were to take a look at Ohio State, they had to decide, once the federal government said, Ohio, you're going to get X number of millions of shots. And remember that at the very beginning, you had two. So if you received your first one, the second one actually had to be stored for you. So there will be no question that you will get the second one. Well, what target population do they have? How many cases were active at that moment? Whether any sort of natural immunity, something that we call herd immunity. What about social issues? Are we doing health? So each state had to go through this type of an algorithm before anybody actually got vaccinated. And if you take a look at this map, what you can see is the big difference between one state and another one on a percentage basis. And these are going to be the following. If you've got 2 doses, the color, the intensity of the color goes higher as the number of people goes higher. And take a look at the tremendous difference that you have in how the vaccine rollout was going. So take a look at New York has got a tremendous population. Take a look at the color, Pennsylvania. Now, Florida is pretty high, as you can see. North Dakota and South Dakota on a percentage basis, beat Florida, but of course, they have a much lower population. Well, what I'm going to do now is that I am going to start quoting the guru of bioethics. And this is Dr. Arthur Kaplan, who is a very well-known professor of bioethics at New York University's Langone Medical Center. So I'm going to take him and the questions that were asked of him and the answers that he gave so that we can talk about bioethics. Okay, so the question is this. Is it important to vaccinate domestic people first before we aid other countries? And his answer was yes. And he actually gave an example. He says, look, you remember that during many of the flights that you had in airlines, once the plane took off, the stewardess would say something like, in case that there is a problem with the air in the cabin, the masks are going to fall down. Put on your mask first, then help your children. Well, so what he's saying is, well, we're going to follow the same thing. We, the United States, are going to take care of our people first, and then we're going to treat and send vaccines to other. Yes. I'm sorry, somebody said something?
No, it was somebody unmuted themselves and
Oh,
there was
okay.
a phone ringing.
Okay, the other thing that is happening, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to happen, especially in the near future, if you're planning to do international travel, is that we're going to have a certificate of vaccination. You're actually going to be bringing this to the airport. It says, here, I've been vaccinated. And so this is already here. This is something new. Okay, next question. Should the wealthy countries provide vaccination aid to the poorer countries? So he didn't have a good answer for that, but what he said is, being Jewish, he answered that question with another question. He said, this is fine, but who's going to pay for the vaccines? So he didn't give an answer. He asked another question. Okay. Now, what about frontline workers? How about making sure that anybody who has to be there with other people, they get vaccinated first, but what if they say, I don't want to be vaccinated? It's another ethical question. What if we make it compulsory? We are going to prioritize vaccination, especially for people that are going to be in hospitals and they're going to be treating patients. Should it be compulsory? It's a question that so far there is no answer. Now, there is another point called vaccine nationalism, and that is, if you take a look at the European Union, about 2.5 weeks ago, the European Union said, we are not going to export any vaccines that are manufactured within the European Union to any other country outside of the EU until our people have been vaccinated. And that, as a general phrase, we call it vaccine nationalism. But is it unethical for healthcare professionals to opt out of vaccination? They're going to be seeing you. You're going to be seeing healthcare people. What about if you catch it from them? Because you can imagine that they're seeing many people. Many of them may be asymptomatic, so then the healthcare personnel gets it and then they pass it along to you. How's that? Have you ever thought of that? Well, should we make it ethical for them to do it? And how do we prioritize? Okay. By now, there are many people many individuals who have been vaccinated, but here in Florida, in our building, about 2-3 weeks ago, I was listening to many of my neighbors who told me that on several occasions, they went to Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami Beach. They waited 3/4 of an hour, 2 hours in line. And as they were getting close to the door, they would say, oops, go home. We ran out of vaccines. I heard them say that. Okay, last two slides. There's a lot of information, misinformation out there about how pharmaceutical companies are being enriched. Well, there is no question that what the government had to do is to take out the risk for pharmaceutical companies for developing the vaccines. And it came in two forms. Form number one was, let's say that you were a pharmaceutical company and you had the capability of making vaccines for COVID. The US government will come to you and say, we're going to buy from you 50 million doses of your vaccine. You test it. If it works, of course, you got them sold, and we're going to give you an additional order for another 50 million doses. And if by any chance it doesn't work, you have no risk. The fact of the matter is, we, the government, are going to pay for you. So go ahead and do it, make it and store it, but this is what we need. Okay, and the other one is, if you get the vaccine and if for some reason you actually get the COVID, you cannot sue the pharmaceutical company. Okay, and this is what I've been saying up until, I've said it many times before, is that 24% of the population across professions and states, 24% of the population, one fifth of, more than 1/5 of individuals over the age of 16 in the United States say they will refuse the vaccine. And the last slide, and then we're going to open it up for discussion, is that we're going to have these conspiracy theories. And probably the lady that is by far the most outspoken out there, if you go into is this Dr. Mikovits. And among other claims that she has made, is that the flu vaccine will actually increase your probability of actually getting the COVID-19. And that the COVID vaccine actually is activated, that is to say enhanced, if you put on a mask. And this is something that you actually saw, and the last thing is, if we give the vaccine, you're actually going to get COVID, and it's going to kill millions of people. So this is my presentation, and we're now ready for Q&A and your answers. Thank you very much.
Dr. Szycher, Judge Liliana Torrebayou should start. She had the first question on the chat.
Sure.
Judge, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Let me look at it. Is it there?
It's still here.
Okay. One of the things that I've noticed from people who have taken the vaccine and waited, and had a lot of bad side effects right after it, they took the vaccine late in the day. And I was wondering if that's because the chain of cold was somehow interrupted at some point because of the delays. They have to warm up the vaccines before they can be given, and if it takes too long in the day, it might be more than the hours allowed for it. So I don't know.
Well, I'm really not familiar with that statistic. However, what I can tell you is this. In the majority of the cases, when you actually had a bad reaction, especially to the first, is that our immune system is different from everybody. Each one of us is an individual. So some people react to the vaccine more than others. In other words, you have a hypersensitivity. There was no question that under normal conditions, you would have had more of an effect when you got your second shot. And the reason is that you created immunoglobulins in memory cells, and they were there. And then when you got the second one, your system said, oh, here's an invader, and we're going to mount a more effective response. So my opinion is that what you're seeing in here is the difference in people Because, when we do things in medicine, Judge, that we have to use statistics. We have to say 80% of the population is going to be okay, but 25% are going to have some kind of side effect. And then what you need to do is that you need to put that particular patient individually within that category. So that would be my answer.
Okay, the next question in line would be from Betty Mack.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I have a question, but first I just wanted to share something that I read today. It was a report that said that Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine has killed 40 times more old people than the virus itself.
Wow.
So just something to think about that I read today. But my question is, Doctor, for you, I know that you mentioned in the beginning that the mRNA vaccine has been developed for 20 years. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that has completely bypassed any test on human beings until now.
Well, let me circle back and go into history. We found out essentially that back in February or March of last year, 2020, that it went from an endemic in China to a pandemic throughout the world. And the question then is that, we have got to do something. This is a new virus that nobody has ever seen. The human population did not have, any sort of exposure to it. So we were very vulnerable. So the question was, if we're going to try to develop a vaccine, which type of vaccines would be most effective, and we can do it in record time, because 1 year to develop a vaccine is absolutely record. So everybody took a look at the information that they had, what kind of vaccines we had in the past, and at least two other companies, that is to say Moderna and Pfizer, said, in our inventory, we have the technology and the manufacturing facilities for the messenger RNA type vaccines. Can we target a specific part of the one of the proteins that is on the surface of the COVID vaccine, the thing called the spike protein. So it's a specific region of the spike protein, and let's see if we can use that technology for COVID. And that's what I meant, that's why it's been around. The platform has been around for about 20 years. I hope that explains it a little better.
Right, but I just want to clarify for everybody listening that it has never actually been tested on human beings. Are you familiar, or anyone listening familiar with the studies that were done on ferrets?
I'm not.
So there were 1,500 ferrets that received the COVID vaccine, and they all survived. And this is my concern with the vaccine, is that they all survived the vaccine, but when they encountered the coronavirus in the environment after receiving the vaccine, not one survived.
No, I didn't see that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Next question comes from Iris and Kevin.
Oh, I know you guys. Hi, Iris. Hi, Kevin. You need to unmute.
Okay, here we go.
All right.
My question is, taking the vaccine, if the chance is that you caught the virus and you take the vaccine, what could happen? And then you need to still go get the second shot.
Kevin, I'm sorry, you were breaking up. I'm not sure I heard your question.
Okay, I'll say it again. If you go get the shot and say you caught the COVID and you get the shot, should you go get the second shot?
Let me see if I understand your question. If you got the first shot and you still got COVID, do you still get the second shot? Was that your question?
Yes.
Oh, well, let's, that's an important question. Let me see if I can try to explain the technology much greater detail than we've gone. Okay. The way that the COVID virus works is that if you get infected and your immune system is not capable of dealing with it, it takes approximately 2 weeks or thereabouts before you actually begin to show symptoms. So the number of viral particles increases exponentially during those two weeks, but you don't know anything about it. And then you get it. So let's say, theoretically, hypothetically, that you got the virus, and then 5 days later, you go and you get your vaccine. Well, at that point, the vaccine is not going to be able to stop the virus because you had it for 5 days, and therefore, at some point in time, you're going to start showing symptoms. So the vaccine didn't give you the virus. You had the virus to begin with, and then you took the vaccine, and then at some point in time, 3, 4, 5 days later, you got it. So the answer is that yes, you should take the second one, because remember the following, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because it gives me an opportunity to explain something very important. Even if you get your 2 shots, or the one if you're going to get the J&J, getting vaccinated doesn't mean that you have 0% probability of getting COVID. That doesn't mean that. You have a 95% effectiveness, so 5% of the people may get it. So the fact is that if you get the vaccine, what the vaccine does is that if you catch the virus afterwards, your treatment, your symptoms are going to be much, much, much lower than if you didn't have the vaccine. So the answer is, if you took the first one and somehow you got the virus, yes, definitely take the second one, because the course of your disease is going to be much easier to treat.
And that second one, say if you had the virus, that second one, you should get it in the same amount of time that they altered, the 28 days.
Yes, so, depending upon which one was 28, the other one was 30 days. But yes, you need to follow the protocol that was set up for you, period.
Thank
Okay.
you, Doc.
I know I'm going to have to change order a little bit. I need to have Rabbi Perlson be the next, and then we're going to go back to Joe Nagler. Rabbi, go ahead with your question. Rabbi? He's muted.
Sorry, thanks. I couldn't unmute for some reason. I'm having problems with my computer. So first of all, Michael, Dr. Szycher, I want to thank you for your lecture. 2 things. Most importantly, that we have to be very careful about what we read and how we read it. There's a lot of anti-vaxxers sending misinformation out. So for example, this is an example of misinformation. So there's 2 different articles that went out. In case you aren't aware, the North American black-footed ferret is the most highly endangered species in North America. And they actually, just like they did in the movies, they found some DNA from a sample from 35 years ago, and they were actually able to clone a series of black-footed ferrets. And now there is a colony of 120 of them. They crossbred them with another ferret. And to safeguard these 120 ferrets, because of where they were exposed, et cetera, they were actually inoculated against COVID-19, believe it or not, because that's how highly. Now, there's an alternative. If you Google it, you'll see that in 2012, the Chinese SARS, the SARS virus, that the Chinese were experimenting with their regular attenuated virus vaccine on ferrets. Those are ferrets in China, and they did have a high rate of death. So there you have 2 stories that have been unfortunate. One is over 8 years old, and has nothing to do with our virus that we have now. And the other one, and you can all Google this, and the other one, for example, I think it's the College of Allergists and North American College of Allergists and Immunologists that actually discuss this. And that you have to make sure that you understand that there is no direct correlation between any major side effects regarding fertility. That's the other thing. Like we have a member of the shul who's in his late 40s and has the option to get vaccinated. And his wife called me, he was refusing. So I said to him, why? He goes, well, it causes infertility. I said, excuse me, you have 4 children. You're in your late 40s. Why is this an issue? Let's say the worst scenario. You know, it does the worst scenario, which I don't, because you and I both know how messenger RNA vaccines work. It doesn't affect fertility. So like, you know, he goes, you're right. And because he was not only eligible, he really should have taken it. He did take both of the vaccines. So the idea is that I personally just want to make sure that our community understands that according to Jewish law, that I'm not sure if you saw the chat, and if this I'm going to end. I take the yearly flu shot because 7 years ago I got the flu and I got really, really sick. And then I gave it to Judy, who got really, really sick. Second reason why I got the flu is because Judy's had pneumonia twice in the last 2.5 years. And when she gets cold, anything that goes right to her chest, and she gets like really, really sick. And the third reason that I did it is that, for example, I also got the shingles shot. And my first shingle shot, oh, that's uncomfortable. My second shingle shot, I got it, you know, and I was sick as a dog for like 2.5 days. I was really sick. Now I'm going to tell everyone, because of my exposure in hospitals, I'm a chaplain, I've been to the hospital, unfortunately, a number of times. I did get vaccinated. Now I feel comfortable telling people. It's not like I butted in line, but because of my exposure, I did get vaccinated. And the second vaccine, I did get sick. I was in bed, I had a fever, and I didn't go to shul. That's how sick I was. But the whole point is that, to me, I've got 3 colleagues and friends who have died from COVID-19. And I believe that as a rabbi, it's my responsibility to encourage people to do their best to get it. And with that, I want to thank you again for letting me speak. It's your evening, and I appreciate everything you've said.
Thank you, Rabbi. Joan Nagler had the reply before you.
Okay, I just unmuted. My question is, for those patients who have cancer and are going through chemotherapy and other types of treatments, when their first course of treatment finishes, this is in the case of my husband, he's going to get the vaccine, but he's been told that it's just not clear whether or not it's going to take in an immune compromised person. So I guess I'm just wondering if you're familiar with any research yet. Maybe it's too soon to know, or if there's a test that one can take to see if they, like if the vaccine has taken place. We've been living in a bubble. We're like one step out of lockdown practically, because I'm trying to protect my husband, of course, not only myself, but especially him. So do you know anything about that, Dr. Szycher, or is there any information yet?
Okay, the quick answer is that it's much too soon for us to know.
Yeah.
You know, normally it would have taken years and years to, you know, come up with answers to the type of question that you have. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is, you know, cancer patients, depending upon what type of medications you have, you are going to be immunosuppressed, right? Okay. So so if you have somebody who has cancer, now their immune system is not going to be able to mount the kind of immunoglobulins that on the normal conditions regular people have. But one way in which we know whether or not the vaccine is doing its job is by doing a blood test. And in that blood test, we take 2 immunoglobulins, immunoglobulin M and immunoglobulin G. So it's IgM and IgG. IgM is formed in the first 2 weeks after you have given the vaccine, and then it starts to go down in titer in concentration, and then IgG takes it from there. So a blood test for anybody. Will actually tell you how well your immune system has reacted to the vaccines. And that's how we would know.
I see. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Ahuva, you had a question? You wanted to reply?
Few remarks. First of all, regarding people getting sick, to Betty Matz, people that were getting sick after getting the vaccine, catching the COVID. Out of Israel, I can tell you, they say they're so mild, they never get into the hospital. They never had a case like that. Even after you actually had the disease, they had people who contacted the virus second time and third time just as well, 2 and 3 months later. So it's just about the same reaction to taking the vaccine as having had it and getting the second time the virus again. What I would really like to know is this question about the blue passport or whatever you would call it, that people would receive when they get the vaccine. What does that mean? Does that mean that if you do not have the blue, because that is a big question in Israel right now that are arguing over, and it's in the courts. Are we allowed to keep these people off flights, for example? If you don't have the passport, what does that mean? So that means that there's a lot of incentive that they are using in Israel for people to go and get vaccinated, like going to the gym, for example, or going indoor restaurants, or going into shows already that they opened up theaters and so forth. So that, but then there's the business people that have to get on flights. So now if you're saying you need to have your passport to get on a flight, what happens with the 24% or 25% that refuse? And how does that keep, of course, the rest of the population safe, which is a big question again. And the other question is, are we allowed to know, is it our right to know who are those doctors or those the people that don't want to be vaccinated, and we are going to need to use their services. Like even we're sending our children to school. Same goes for teachers, So is it our right or is it their right to keep themselves? Because right now we don't really know. We don't here in the United States, we don't even know if somebody that we've been around was sick or got sick. If we were in the area where they have been, if we were in any contact with them, we don't either. So that's another question that we have. So there's a lot of these right now, the rights, whose right is it to, I see somebody waving wants to answer. I think it's Ed.
Betty Max was the one who wanted to answer for me. Okay, you.
Somebody waved.
Somebody waved.
Okay, if it is.
Ed waved.
Oh, Ed Weiner? Oh, okay, Ed Weiner is very knowledgeable. Dr. Ed Weiner. Ed, go right ahead.
But you need to unmute yourself, Ed.
I've been an elected public health official for 33 years. I have a doctorate in the area of hematology, and I'm a close colleague of Michael Szycher, who was a brilliant man. I have been very involved in this controversy, especially in many of the ethical situations. And unfortunately, I have been picked up by a lot of television stations, radio, local cable, all whatever. So I live this. In the United States, we have HIPAA. There is no way that anybody will learn your information around your sickness. We have situations where people cannot have a vaccine. They just can't take the vaccine. They're allergic to certain components of it. As far as a passport, I've traveled the world, and I can tell you, I got to Africa. And in Africa, you have to have your typhoid card.
Absolutely.
when I was in South Africa about a year ago, the first thing they did when I got to passport control is they took my temperature. And if my temperature was high, go back to the plane, you're going back to the US.
Absolutely.
But the real issue is in this country, there are privacy laws. In this country, you can't force anybody. I heard today it was 27% of people who are first responders had refused to take the vaccine. Recently in my community, I happened to be talking to the fire chief. He told me 20% of the firefighters will not take the vaccine for any reason. I've been vaccinated for months now because I am a public health first responder in my community. But there are a lot of laws, and I don't see people having to carry a card to go anywhere throughout the United States. Other countries may enforce what they want to enforce, and they have a right to enforce it, that it'll never happen in this country. You know, and just one more funny story. Other than this year, the first time I ever have been gone on this thing called Facebook. And I got to tell you, there are so many people on Facebook that you have to raise your eyebrows. And I would never respond on Facebook, but I had it once. There was somebody on Facebook who was claiming that these vaccines, quote unquote, were filled with, and I guess I'm speaking to a rabbi who has a degree in biochemistry, as I read his bio. But people in all these vaccines have and contain a very bad compound called dihydroxide, and it was going viral around the country. Dihydroxide, and what people were saying, never will I have dihydroxide in my body. My children will never have dihydroxide in my body. I can see ahava. What is dihydroxide?
Water.
Water. And for the first time, I had to jump in. I know there are a lot of anti-vaxxers. I just want to point out, and I know it's 100 years ago, but 50 million people died of the flu of
The Spanish flu.
1917. Now, they didn't even have antibiotics then, and I realize secondary infections were huge, but still, I understand people's trepidation. I'm not, but you know, sometimes, I'll just give one example. How many people have experimental cancer drugs? You know, it's not actually the same thing, but it is. We try things. You know, I'm 69 years old yesterday, Michael. I'm going to have this. I want to live to be another 69 years, but I don't. But the key here is that the body of knowledge around any drug gets better and better and better as every single day goes by. You know, people didn't want to take lots of things in the past. Look what happened. You know, the anti-vaxxers say to me, but look, you know, remember thalidomide. Remember the thalidomide scare where children were deformed? Well, thalidomide never came to the country. Just because it's a year old does not mean that there were significant trials for vaccines. And if we were going to see something really bad, we would start to see it now. At least I feel that way. Sorry, Michael, I got off on a tangent.
No.
Maybe one of you can relate also to long-term effects after actually contracting the virus.
Don't know. We don't know yet. You know, we've been living.
No, I'm talking about people who actually had the virus and, you know, were very sick, and they said
absolutely
look horrible after that. And what do we know about that?
We don't. We know that there are a lot of people who died after months and months and months. I have a friend, a rabbi, who contracted symptoms on a Friday because he hugged somebody at services or somebody was teaching, and he died on Sunday. It was a tragedy. You know, I'm willing to take the chances in life. You know, I took the chance. I got married 44 years ago. That could have been even more. but it's you've got to take this chance. I really feel it. And it's not just for me. You know, if you want to get COVID and you don't want to have the vaccine and you want to get sick and increase your propensity for sick, that's okay. But don't spread it to my kids. Don't spread it to my family. And about nurses and doctors who won't take the vaccine, well, A, it's their right. B, then they have to do what they did with in most hospitals when people couldn't be vaccinated against the flu. They had to wear masks right through, continuously. They had to wear masks is something. But you know, we're also dealing with unions, and the unions will not enforce the mask situation. They won't enforce the vaccine. That's their right too. But I just worry about not the fact that I'm going to get COVID, because at least I made the effort. I got my vaccine, but my wife hasn't. I don't want somebody coming to my house who hasn't been vaccinated and symptomatically carry that vaccine to my wife. So it's not just for you, it's for the rest of the community. It's for our families, our children, and whatever. And I do understand that. And the vaccine distribution has been horrible, has been ridiculous. I've spoken on that all over the country. And we have had an absolute chaotic vaccination program throughout the United States, and hopefully it'll all catch up and it'll be okay. But we're learning. That's all I can say. We're learning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weiner. Dr. Szycher, do you have any other wordings? Anybody else has any other questions?
Okay, well, I think that my parting words are, even after you have taken the vaccine, don't let your guard down.
We can't see your video, Dr. Szycher.
Oh, I don't know, for some reason I can't go back. Let me see, start video. No. Oh,
There
There you are.
okay. So my last words would be that you know, after you take the vaccine, not only for yourself, but like Dr. Weiner has said, think about everybody else around you. Stay, you know, keep your mask. Don't let your guard down.
And Michael, I'm not a physician, you're not a physician, but all my physician friends tell me, wear your mask, wash your hands, and 6 feet socially distance is the best thing you can do.
Agree.
Thank you all very much
Thank
for
you,
it.
Dr. Michael.
Does
Thank you very
anybody
much.
else have any questions? If you can unmute yourselves to make any comments or questions.
Thank you, Michael.
Nami, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
I learned a lot.
Bravo.
And Ed, too.
Thank you again, Dr. Mike.
Nice to see you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye, Liana. Bye.
On
Bye.
behalf,
Bye-bye.
on behalf
Bye.
of Temple
Good
Menorah,
night.
thank you all for coming in. Thank
Good
you,
night,
Dr.
everybody.
Szycher, for your presentation.
My pleasure.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good
night.
night.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Good night.
Lila Tov.